This morning this week we've talked about all sorts of leadership things. One of the best things about being a leader, or one of the ways to be a very effective leader at least, is to be first and foremost a good follower, a good team player. So we're going to talk about that this morning in ways that I think are easily transferable. I love stuff that you can write on a napkin and remember quite easily, and this will be one of those things, okay? Guarantee it, Scott. Yes. Easy. By the end, you'll say, I know exactly what an ideal team player is. We had the privilege, and by we I mean Karen, who's not in the room. There she is. Sorry, Karen, Daryl, and I went to Ecuador in 2016. This is a picture of, is Hector in the room? Yes. Do you know what that place is? Have you been there?
No, if that's Ecuador, I don't know.
No, that's Ruku Pichincha. My pronunciation might not be best. You say it.
Ruku Pichincha?
See. Okay. Hey. I think they knew what I was saying, but you said it so much better. It's great. So on a particular Sunday, we thought it would be good to stretch the whole person. And well, I'll back that up even a bit before that. We had a person from Ecuador at Summer Institute the year before, and about the third day in, he came up with this crazy idea that he approached Daryl and team about, and he said, would you guys ever consider doing SI in Ecuador? Be really easy for people to get, what are those things called? Visas. Thank you. Very easy for people to get visas. And so I think there were people from 9 different Latin American nations came together. A team of 6 Canadians went down, and it's brought about a 3-year partnership, hopefully to train up Latin American leaders. So on this one Sunday, we decided to go for a walk. Walk is mild. So we took this gondola up to about, I think, a mile high. And then we went 2 more miles to get to the top of this peak, Ruku Pichincha. And Patrick Bowler is that guy you see in the picture, but you may not be able to see it well enough. Patrick was the epitome of an ideal team player that day. So as we walked along, and we did some exercises to sort of warm up to the altitude, because when you're at a mile high, it's pretty hard to breathe. So they're teaching us. Pardon me?
It's because you've never been in La Paz.
It's because I have not been to La Paz yet. So we did some exercise, then we kept going up. But the higher you get, there's this interesting thing that happened. I don't know if Karen and Daryl remember it this way, but it's like each step is kind of difficult. Like you're pressing on, in the words of Philippians 3 the other night. So Patrick would be the last guy in the line, making sure that everybody was going okay. And if you know him, he's the nicest guy in Youth for Christ. So he would ask people, can I carry your backpacks? Are you doing okay? Do you need some water? He's just the nicest guy going. And then the last part of that climb, which is actually 3 miles total, is about 150 yards of pretty steep rock. And that's where it looked a little scary. And Patrick was the guy who wanted to make sure that everybody got up. And I think at one point he literally had his hand on the backpack of a person beside him, helping pull that person up, because he wanted everyone to succeed. So that is the epitome of an ideal team player. Anybody know Patrick? Hey, he would be horrified if he knew I was telling that story about him, because he's the most humble guy going. But he is a fantastic team player. Here's what we're going to talk about this morning. So we're going to introduce the model of the ideal team player. Then we're going to talk about how to spot the 3 virtues of the ideal team player in others. Then we're going to talk about how to develop those virtues in ourselves, because that's not a given. We're going to do a little assessment on ourselves and see how are we doing as a team player. How to encourage others to develop further. And we're also going to give, last and not least, a common language for talking about ideal team players. So the other day we talked about the leadership challenge and the 5 practices of exemplary leadership. Do you remember what they are? Remember what the acronym was? Let's start there. MICE, which is the first one, Jana.
Model the way.
Model the way. The I is
Inspire shared vision.
The C is? Nice, that's good group work. Okay. E, the next D?
Encourage the heart.
Encourage the heart, okay, which is actually the last one. That's pretty cool. Okay. That's very hard, actually, to do that. And what's the one we're missing? Another E.
Power.
Engage others to lead.
Very close. Empower, engage, enable others to act. So that's pretty cool. We're doing well. So, just like in the Leadership Challenge, you get a common language to speak about those things. When you go through the Ideal Team Player, you'll have the same thing. And you can sit in your circle and just say, you know, this is really relevant when you're thinking about bringing on another person to your team. Is this person a team player? Do they have the 3 virtues that make that? Or where might they be lacking? And so you can do this with your volunteers very easily. And you can learn how to teach it actually in about 15 minutes. So I'll show you that at the end. So let's carry on here. Henry Cloud said this: you either get the culture you create or the culture you allow. So, in other words, you know, if people are frustrating you on their team because they're always late, or they're loud, or they're selfish, or you know, maybe it's you who's always late and you're frustrating the rest of your team, a certain culture comes in, an environment where certain things are allowed. Okay, anybody have any of those things on your team that frustrate you? Probably do. So those have been allowed behaviors, but as the team leader and as a team participant, sometimes you have to lead up. We can talk about that in a few minutes. You can create the culture that you want. Okay, so that's the good news. What do you see in that picture at the top? Like, what do you think is going through the minds of those 2 women?
Why did we ever let ourselves get talked into this?
Okay, that's partially true. This also happened on that trip in Ecuador. So I believe that's Myra and Teresa. So some of you will know Teresa used to work in Central Canada as a trainer, and Myra, who's the South American director, works a lot with Ecuador. So looking at Teresa's body posture, what do you see? Does it tell you anything?
Which one is she?
Sorry?
Which one is she?
Nailed it. Okay, Philippa. So she's scared. I would say even a further level, and she's okay with me telling this, terrified for those of us who are there. And is that Myra or Amy who's with her? Amy, sorry. And Amy was actually whispering in her ear, you can do this. You've got this. I'm right beside you. Step by step, we're going to do this together. And Teresa's knees were shaking. She experienced tears because she absolutely hates heights. And we were all saying, you know what, if you want to get down, that's okay. She said, no, I really want to do this. And she pushed herself. Like some of you did the other day doing, you know, the high ropes and so on. But this was in the jungle, and it looked a little scarier, to be honest. So Amy actually helped get her across to that other side. In this left picture, the fellow in red is a gentleman named David Castillo. And much the same as Teresa, was very nervous to do that, but the environment was such that he felt such encouragement, such support from the people around him that he actually stepped out on the wire and went across. So the environment actually allowed people to go further than they thought they were capable of. It was pretty cool. So great quote from him. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to think of an athlete, a celebrity or public, public figure who is not a team player. We're going to illustrate this from the negative for a moment. And why are they not a team player? So just think of somebody. Who can you think of that is not a team player? And I'm going to guess who's in your mind. How's that? We're going to play the Amazing Kreskin. Okay? Donald Trump.
Yes.
Isn't that amazing? He's always first in people's minds. It's interesting. Okay? Now, why is it that Donald Trump is not a good team player?
He doesn't have his team back. His whole team leaves. They never know what's going on. He lambastes them on Twitter.
But other than that,
He's not particularly humble.
Okay.
He's more like narcissistic.
Over hungry and he's not smart.
Well, he's smart. He's very intellectual man.
But he's
Only
not
thing I'll say
emotionally
positive-
intelligent enough to
No.
be smart.
Oh, sorry, I was didn't read the page and I like smart. It's like,
Hey, so we see some issues there, that would make him very hard to work with on a team. Anybody else come to mind?
LeBron James.
Okay, so sometimes, why is that, Scott?
Zach.
Why is that?
I think LeBron is one of those players that thinks that if he isn't performing, his team won't do it. And I feel like he almost feels like if that he's the best on his team and that he needs to be at his A game in order to make his team better. But I would say that a team player doesn't say they just go and do it. Versus having a feel like anybody who votes themselves to be MVP probably is a narcissist by far.
Okay, there might be issues working with them on a team. Okay, and we're picking on these people. We're going to pick on ourselves in a moment. So yeah.
I was thinking Trudeau because he can talk really well, but he doesn't back it up. He's a schmoozer. He's very charismatically speaking,
Ah.
but his conduct is very different.
Oh, okay. We're going to get to that personality, aren't we, Shane? Yeah. Okay. Turn with me to the page that looks like this. I think it's the first one in your section, the ideal team player. And if somebody could read humble, and then somebody to read the hungry and smart there. So let's go. Josh, you want to read that first section? Then we'll go to Katie. How's that? Could you read? Do you mind reading aloud? And then let's go over here to, let's hear it in British. Do you mind reading aloud? Oh, you don't have your binder. Let's hear it from Jana. Okay. Okay, start us off, Josh.
Humble. Ideal team players are humble. They lack excessive ego or concerns about status. Humble people are quick to point out the contributions of others and slow to seek attention for their own. They share credit, emphasize team over self, and define success collectively rather than individually.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Okay.
Hungry. Ideal team players are hungry. They are always looking for more. More things to do, more to learn, more responsibility to take on. Hungry people almost never have to be pushed by a manager to work harder because they are self-motivated and diligent. They are constantly thinking about the next step and the next opportunity.
Okay. And now as we read these, you're probably thinking even the people that you've interacted with this week, you can see those virtues in people around the room, right? So some lights should be going off, or some alarms at least. Okay. And smart. Smart.
Smart. Ideal team players are smart. They have common sense about people. Smart people tend to know what is happening in a group situation and how to deal with others in the most effective way. They have good judgment and intuition around the subtleties of group dynamics and the impact of their words and actions.
Okay, nice. And we're going to read some of these today just because I want to make sure that you get it. And there's a different nuance in each description of what we'll read. So turn on to the next page to how to spot ideal team players. And this one's a bit more lengthy. This is the hardest thing you'll have to do in the next hour. Well, that's not true, but it's one of them. Okay, so who feels like reading for a bit? Paragraph or two? So you don't have to just hear from me. Thank you. Becca.
With enough time, patience, and attention from a good manager, almost anyone can learn to become a team player. I believe that. Having said that, some people are better at teamwork than others. These are the kind of people who add immediate value in the team environment and require much less coaching and management to contribute in a meaningful way. So, there are two obvious questions. What do these people look like? And how do we find them? As it turns out, they have three qualities or virtues in common. They are humble, hungry, and smart. Before I explain each of those virtues, let me explain how this theory came about. Like so many of my ideas, this one surfaced as a result of my own work with clients over the past 20 years. Whenever I worked with CEOs and their leadership teams to identify core values, I often was asked about the values of my own firm, Table Firm. When we revealed our 3 values, many of our clients would ask us if they could adopt those values for themselves. Of course, we would say no, explaining that they need to come up with concepts that reflected their unique history and culture. We were a company oriented around teamwork and known for the 5 dysfunctions of a team. So the values of humble, hungry, and smart made sense for us. What we failed to realize was that our clients, almost all of whom were committed to the idea of teamwork, were drawn to our values because those were the building blocks of real team players. Once we realized this, the idea for this book was born.
Okay, how many of you are familiar with the 5 dysfunctions of a team? You've read that before or looked at it? Okay, so Patrick Lencioni is rather famous in human resources field. He is a Christian guy who writes for the larger audience. So he makes it understandable for anybody and not particular just to churches. But he's written some really good stuff. We'll unpack the 5 dysfunctions in a few moments, but that's very helpful. Thank you, Becca. Who wants to continue on here? Need a reader? Philippa, thank you. Oh, sorry. You guys can split. Let us, when you get tired, we'll pass it over to Jana.
Okay. The 3 virtues, humble, hungry, and smart. 3 virtues seem quite simple, but require a bit of explanation. Humble. The first and most important virtue of an ideal team player is humility. A humble employee is someone who is more concerned with the success of the team than with getting credit for his or her contributions. People who lack humility in a significant way, the ones who demand a disproportionate amount of attention, are dangerous for a team. Having said that, humble team players are not afraid to honestly acknowledge the skills and talents that they bring to the team, though never in a proud or boastful way. Hungry. The next virtue of an ideal team player is hunger, the desire to work hard and do whatever is necessary to help the team succeed. Hungry employees almost never have to be pushed by a manager to work harder because they are self-motivated and diligent. They volunteer to fill the gaps, take on more responsibilities, and are eagerly looking around corners for new ways to contribute to the team.
Jana.
Smart. The final virtue of a team player is not about being intelligent, but rather about being wise in how to deal with people. Smart employees understand the nuances of team dynamics and know how their words and actions impact others. Their good judgment and intuition help them deal with others in the most effective way. As simple as these 3 concepts may be, the key to all this is the unique combination of all 3 virtues, which make a person an ideal team player. Unfortunately, when even one of these attributes is lacking in a significant way, challenges can arise. For instance, a humble and hungry employee who is not smart about people may accomplish a great deal, but will often leave a trail of interpersonal destruction behind them. And a person who is smart and humble, but lacking in hunger, will frustrate team members by doing only what is required and having to be constantly asked to do more. Finally, a team member who is hungry and smart, but truly lacking in humility, can have a devastating impact on a team. This type knows how to present himself or herself as a well-intentioned colleague, all the while looking out for his or her own needs. By the time team members figure this out, people have been manipulated and scarred.
So just before you read this final paragraph, so once you get the concepts of these things and you learn how to work well with them as a team, it's very important language when you're hiring people. So we actually do this in YFC Canada now. And I'll give you a couple tools later, but we intentionally use this grid of hungry, humble, and smart and ask questions that ferret out those things. Is this person a team player? Because quite frankly, if they're not, we don't want them, because it'll be a problem somewhere down the road. And if you make a wrong hire, a hasty one, it can actually cost you about 3 years worth of productivity, experts would say. So it's worth doing it with great care. Carry on, Jana.
How do you go about hiring ideal team players? It's mostly about knowing what to look for and probing in non-traditional ways. And what about employees who already work on the team and lack one or more of the virtues? A big part of helping them improve is making sure they understand the concepts and know where they fall short. We found that merely introducing this simple model to teams and allowing them to self-assess goes a long way towards improvement.
Okay, and we'll do that in a couple minutes. Let me just show you something here. So we have hungry, humble, and smart. Pretty basic. We've heard that well. All good readers, by the way. That was nice. So you can have one of the three virtues. And so let's say that you are hungry. This is probably the most easy to recognize one, the bulldozer. Hey, we've all come across a bulldozer before on a team. You know, they just get stuff done, and if you happen to be in the way, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so you won't find this in your notes. This is just some bonus stuff. Write it down, though, if you want. So the hungry person is just the bulldozer. The smart one, smart person is the charmer, if that's the only quality they have. Usually people will have 2 of 3. It's more problematic when they only have 1. So if they're only smart, but they're not hungry and they're not humble, they're a charmer. So no matter what the circumstance is, they come off looking good. Okay, but after a while, their colors are shown, and people see for what it is, and it's not really appreciated. And then finally, the person who is humble, but isn't hungry or smart, and you'll meet people. Are you understanding what smart is? Like that emotional smarts thing, that in a group you're smart with people, you know what to say and how to say it, how to respond, and so on. But if you don't have the smarts or the hunger and you're just humble, you're the pawn. So, or the doormat, sometimes it's called. Hey, people will walk over you. So the good news is you can learn the other qualities and practice them to a greater extent, and then that'll be improved. So this is, for people who don't understand Canadian culture, this might be a bit of a stretch. But this guy in white here, Avery, was probably, in his day, the dirtiest hockey player in the NHL, arguably, or close. And he did this big no-no that you do not do in Canadian hockey. He would stand in front of the goalie, and although it wasn't technically illegal, he would stand in the goalie's face, and during that playoffs, he'd have his stick in the goalie's face so he couldn't go anywhere. And everywhere that Martin Brodeur tried to move, Avery would get in the way. So they finally began to, call some penalties. But here's what's interesting. Even his teammates got frustrated with his behavior. Okay, so he wasn't helping his team. He was actually a detriment. So not cool. What if you've got 2 of the 3 virtues? So you can be hungry and smart, which will make you a skillful politician. And I think maybe that's what you were alluding to earlier, Josiah. You know the right things to say, you've got some action to do it, but somehow the credit always comes back to you. Okay? Somehow you're the one who's always getting the accolades. You can be humble and smart, but not really ever do anything, and you can be the lovable slacker. Everybody loves you, but they have a hard time figuring out what have they actually done. So, and you can be humble and hungry, and you can be an accidental mess maker because you're not very smart with people. So here's what I want you to do. Some of you have already done this, so you get like a bonus couple of minutes to pray or whatever. So do a self-assessment here. You'll see that sheet. And just mark yourself honestly, because that's what's most important. This is meant to benefit you. So I'll give you a couple minutes to fill that out.
Also, can I say something? Because I had to do this twice, because I made a mistake the first time. This is how your team would rate you, not how you rate yourself. That matters.
Okay.
The distinction makes a difference, because we're our own worst critic. So try and think about how your teammates would rate you.
Okay, so let's just read the instructions to make sure we're not leading anybody astray, okay? So, take this assessment to evaluate yourself relative to the 3 virtues of an ideal team player. Respond as honestly as possible, as this will allow you to most accurately identify any areas of development that you may have. Use the scale below to indicate how each statement applies to how you think your teammates may see you and your actions on the team. Choose the rating response number that best applies to each statement and record it in the box to the right of the statement. Then total your scores for each of the 3 virtues. Good. Okay, great. So give you a couple minutes there. Okay, next page. Turn up. What was that? Okay. You will see, and regardless of what you think of Sidney Crosby, because there are some people who don't like him, he is a fantastic team player because he does raise the game of those around him, right? How many Stanley Cups has Sidney Crosby won? Pardon me? 3. Pretty good accolade, right? So, pretty good team player. Turn over to how the ideal team players help you overcome the 5 dysfunctions of a team. So Lencioni, looking at the bottom and then moving up, Lencioni would say one of the first dysfunctions is an absence of trust. Okay, if you don't have trust on a team, that's problematic. So we build trusting relationships by being open and accessible. So if you're the leader of a team, I don't know how you're hearing this, like in what context. If you're the leader of the team, you need to be the one who's willing to go vulnerable, to go first and be vulnerable. Okay? So, because the team's going to take the cue from you. If you're never doing that, guess what? The team will never do it. You'll be saying, why don't we ever talk about anything of importance? Secondly, after you have trust, or if you don't have trust, that has a problem for a fear of conflict. So ideal team players do and say the right things to help teammates feel appreciated and understood, even when difficult situations arise. So sometimes that means biting your tongue if you're on the team. If you think a team member is whining, if they're being difficult or whatever, you learn to ask good questions, you're empathetic, that kind of thing will actually help them to enter into that conflict more readily. If there's a lack of commitment, the ideal team player commit to team goals and do whatever is necessary to accomplish objectives. So when I was an elder at my church, we had this one conversation one time. I go to a Presbyterian church, so we had this debate about, among the elders, whether or not children would take communion. And people had varying opinions on that, as we do, even in this room. And so there was one side of the group, I'll say, or team, that said, you know what, Jesus said, let the little children come unto me. Let's not get in the way. If a child wants to take communion, they can do it. And then there was other people who would say, well, how can they do that? They don't understand what they're doing if they're not an adult and so on. So that wasn't the point. The point was, let's work that out in this room. And then when we leave this room, we can have all the disagreement we want in here. But when we leave, we're committed together. So I can't leave this room and then throw Dave under the bus later and say, I didn't agree with him anyway. Okay, because that's just not cool. That's not a good team player. So then the fourth one is the avoidance of accountability, that dysfunction. Hold their colleagues accountable, always strive to learn and do more, and constantly look toward the next opportunity. Okay, so that one's easy enough, I think. Actually, it's much harder to put into practice on a team, isn't it? So, and then finally, there's an inattention to results. The ideal team players share accomplishments with everyone and leave their egos at the door. Okay, so he said, hey, we did this together. Doesn't matter who gets the credit, because every once in a while, let's face it, our motives are mixed. We're fallen people. And you sit there and say, well, I actually did that. Here's the truth. I honestly caught myself doing that yesterday in something that was said in one of the sessions, because it was actually our team that did some of it. And I was thinking, oh, okay, we should have got credit. And then I caught myself. It doesn't really matter. Right? It doesn't really matter who gets the credit. It was done, and that's great. So the 5 dysfunctions are pretty helpful, and humble team members are able to be vulnerable. They engage in honest conflict and hold others accountable. They define success collectively, commit to learn or to team goals, and do not value status or ego. How about hungry? Who wants to read that one? Josiah.
Sure. Hungry team members are willing to engage in uncomfortable conflict and hold others accountable. They will go above and beyond to achieve results and are always contemplating the next step.
So they'll exhaust you from time to time, right? Because they want to keep going all the time, and you might want to break. And then finally, smart. Danny, would you mind reading that one, please? You made eye contact, so that was my cue. Yeah.
Smart team members understand group dynamics and can tactfully engage in productive conflict. They have good interpersonal skills and tend to understand how to deal with others in the most effective way.
Okay. So, are you getting that? Like, are you thinking about different people on your team and seeing where strengths and weaknesses may lie? Just because you work together with a number of people, so let's say you've got 4 or 5 people, doesn't automatically make you a team, by the way. Okay, that makes you a group. Okay, until you actually start doing some work together. So, ideal team player will give us some handles. Hopefully you're connecting some dots and saying, okay, you know, I wonder how I come across. And then what about the other people on my team? And you're going to get a chance in a few minutes to think, how could we help one another develop? So, you have a thing in your binder called the Ideal Team Player Self-Ranking Exercise. So you can take the scores from the self-assessment you did earlier, step 2 there, and you can put what you were strongest at, what your medium one was, and what your low. Now, chances are, in a group like this, you tied on some of your scores. So this is where you have to make a judgment. Okay, what do I think is my lowest score? What do I think is my highest? So just jot those in there. Okay, so step 3, bit more work on yourself, and then I'm going to set you loose to talk in groups. Oh, you've already done it. Okay, so, Caitlin, could I have your attention for 1 sec?
Sorry,
Okay, you're all high?
I was all tied.
Oh, tied.
Trying to get an outside perspective of what you thought might.
Okay, let's do that in a sec. So, just talk in groups of 3, 2 or 3, and whatever you're comfortable with, not more than 3. And just talk about what you rated there, and then think about how could you help one another, or suggest things that would help one another to develop. Okay, go that far, and then we'll look at step 4. So, move into now talking about, and write down some things on that piece of paper, on that second piece of paper, 1 or 2 or 3 things that you can do to improve in a particular area, and then share that with one another. Make it very concrete. Don't just make it out there. Well, you're ahead of the rest.
Wow, we're better than all of you.
Keep it up. Then I'm going to ask you to share an idea or 2. Okay, back to your discussion. Sorry to interrupt you. Just wanted to make sure you're progressing. You can continue to have some more discussion, but I think there's some more things worth talking about as a whole group. Heard some fascinating conversations around the room, so you guys seems to me like you're tracking with this and it makes sense. One of the things about the 3 virtues is you can also catch yourself when you've behaved in a certain way, and then you can come back the next day and you say, gee, I wasn't very humble there, or I didn't contribute, or, you know, I was too hungry and I ran over people, right? I just, you know, I didn't respect their space. So this language, first and foremost, applies to us, right? So it's not something that we just point to the members of the other team and say, wow, they're idiots, right? It's, no, first, you know, I need to change. It gives me language to process that. So what kinds of things were you hearing about how you need to develop? What practical things were you hearing? And then we'll get to some of the questions that surfaced. So anybody, come up with anything that how you will grow in a particular area. Yes?
Well, a number of us, we struggle with like being involved, like having opportunities to be involved in other people's ministry. Looking for opportunities to contribute outside of my areas of responsibility. Because we just are really, we don't want to stretch ourselves too thin, we don't know how to do that. So something we kind of came up with together was asking our fellow team how we can be praying for their ministries.
Yep.
And just being involved more and knowing what they're doing
Yeah.
is a good way of just having those opportunities, and showing that we care about their ministry is something that can be on our plate.
Yep.
At the same time as everything else that we're doing. So
Excellent. And it feels great when somebody asks you about their ministry and they genuinely care, right? Because it's lonely. So that would mean a great deal to them. What else?
Part of what he was talking about humility was it can also be someone who doesn't see their impact on the team. When I talk with my team, that's often the case with me. So talking with my supervisor and talking about how I can start to recognize my contribution.
Okay. Your supervisor doesn't think you see them? Or?
Well, I know that I don't see them all the time. Because
Okay.
they are called out.
Okay.
Like people do tell me when I've contributed.
Yeah.
I don't see them right away. Like
Okay.
it takes weeks for us to like talk about how we're doing in the team.
Yeah.
And then it comes out. So recognizing them sooner would be helpful.
Yep. Okay, great. How great did it feel? One of my favorite parts of SI is when you're in your small groups and you do the words of affirmation for one another. So, how many people enjoyed that? Hey, so it's pretty cool, right? Just to sit there. Well, it's a little uncomfortable, but then you just say thank you. I love it. So, great question. Yes. Any other thing? What other things? Yep, Bonnie.
So one of my things was smartness. I know I'm observant, so when I hear someone talk, I understand what they're feeling, but I don't necessarily know how to feed back and respond to that because I come from a culture where everybody's just stoic, right? So I don't know who to model it after. And so Shane actually made a really good point because I'm so task-oriented. If I'm in a meeting, if I have a task, I don't remember to observe other people's body language. And it's like, that's a task, right? So he's like, find a meeting where you're completely uninvolved. You just sit there and watch people's verbal and nonverbal. I thought that was really good. So that's
Very smart. Shane is a smart man. So, my counseling prof used to use this phrase all the time, which was brilliant. He'd say, "Listen with your eyes." So because you'll have somebody telling you something and their body language is, they're leaning back or they got their arms folded or whatever. And if you're the lead on a team, learn to pick up the cues on your team too and say, okay, Katie, how do you feel about this? Because something about their face, the furrowed brow, the cross, all those kinds of things, pay attention to those. They're sometimes more important than what they say, right? So, yeah. Okay, others. Daryl.
Just a quick follow-up to that. Because you were talking to Bonnie, and Bonnie mentioned coming from a particular culture, if you're a team lead and it's a multicultural team, you want to really be paying attention to those cues because, as Bonnie said, she comes from a culture that is very stoic, right? And Bonnie and I had a really interesting conversation about cross-cultural communication the other day, just noting that with some cultures, unless you are giving a direct question like, can you give me some feedback, can you tell me something about this, unless you actually ask the question directly to the individual, depending on the culture they come from, they're not going to give you feedback because in their culture it would be improper, it would be disrespectful to jump in with an idea. So this is particularly, this is just really helpful and really valuable when you're working with it. In our multicultural society, we will run into this more and more.
Yeah. Good.
So I work with ESL kids, and one of the best things to be is like have that initial meeting that's like, how is it in your culture, and don't just like assume that too. Like get to know like what it is like in their culture and how they will best like respond to that, so that you're not just assuming that, oh, like Bonnie is from that culture, so she must be like this, Just knowing that she actually is.
Okay, great. Book called The Resilient Ministry by Burns, Guthrie, and Chapman. They would say there's 5 practices that the leader who finishes well does, and one of them is they understand cultural intelligence. So worth picking that up. Maybe culture mapping would be a good thing to read. So Resilient Ministry. Sorry?
Yeah, no, I was asking the same question.
Resilient Ministry, Burns, Guthrie, and Chapman. That might not be the exact title, but it's close. Hey, any other things, that you want to do for development?
Yeah.
Colton.
So I need to work in being hungry. So one thing I plan on doing is just be willing to take the job first before hearing all the other jobs. it can have a tendency to like, who wants to do this? And you wait till there's 3 and then you're like, oh, I like that one. So just volunteering.
Volunteering a little sooner. Okay, great. Cool. Here's a thing that's really, for those of you who struggle in that area of hunger, and there probably will be. So one of the great things you can do is employ a coach, and I mean like actually pay them, or we have some in Youth for Christ across Canada who would be willing to do that and are eager to coach people. And here's why that's so different, or makes a difference, is because if you write a goal like you did last Saturday, your likelihood of accomplishing that is somewhere around the neighborhood of 50%. When you write it down and you put a date, it goes up to about 70 or 75. When you tell somebody else, it goes up to about 85. And if you have a coach who's going to ask you and hold you accountable, it goes up to about 95. So, if you really want to be serious about accomplishing some things, then you will have somebody who will hold you accountable. And say you set 10 goals for next year, okay? And you only accomplish 5, guess what? You're 50% further than you were last year. So don't worry about if you don't accomplish all your goals. You just say, oh, I'm further ahead than I would have been, without giving it attention. So, yeah, Josiah.
Does YFC have team coaches? People who will coach the entire team?
They do have some people, well, there are some people who would be able to do that. Yeah. Yep, 2 or 3. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Something I found very good for myself, and this is what I saw from my church, is that every first week of a year, we go through certain material together. Yeah, I think you all heard about GLS.
Nope.
Global Leadership Summit.
Oh, okay, yes.
First place I heard about Patrick, and I did this last year with my church.
Yeah.
So things like that can really push your team. And I mean, just the knowledge. If you have it, you will invest your time in it.
Yeah. So there were a number of questions surfacing in the crowd as I walked around. And Daryl, am I okay if I go about 5 more minutes?
Well, sorry, what time do we need to be done for lunch?
11:45. Is that right, Dana?
Lunch is at noon.
Noon.
We're good for a few more minutes.
Okay. So one of the questions that surfaced in a number of different ways is like, what if I'm a team member, but my team is dysfunctional? What do I do? Hey, and that'll happen. So I would recommend, first of all, and this is going to sound trite, but be a good team player. Okay, like be that submissive person. Don't be the person who walks out and grumbles and stuff. You know, I've experienced that, and when you feed that ugliness, it just gets worse for you. Like find 1 or 2 key people to talk about that wisely who will challenge you and so on. But be a good team player. And then I'd also say bring in Montreal YFC. I don't think Francois was around, but last year we had a great day in January where we talked about DISC for teams, our personality styles. And Montreal had been having some particular conflict and struggles that have been going on for about a year that had sort of permeated the whole chapter. Right? I don't think Al would mind me saying this. We've talked about it before. And Josh. So what we did is we wanted to talk about that in a safe way. And then, I was a neutral person. So I could say certain things or ask questions that they wouldn't ask themselves because it would feel loaded. Right? So if you bring in an objective person to do like an ideal team player thing, it's a lot safer. And then you can actually talk about significant things and make change happen. So it takes a lot of wisdom to lead up and say, okay, you know, do we want to keep developing? What sorts of things could we do this year? I would like to give us to give some attention to how we grow as a team, all those kinds of things. So I think it's asking good questions, but be a good team player. And just be really wise about how you bring about those kinds of changes. So, because you can't control, and sometimes that's frustrating when you're not the team leader. So you got to ask questions and be a good team player. Then you earn the right to be heard, right? Just some generic things so that we've thought about as we've done this before. For those who are struggling with humility, right? So there's this motives check that happens in ministry, because there's a dark side to just about every spiritual gift. Think about the gift of shepherding. The dark side is controlling. Okay, so the dark side of teaching is this. So, because I teach a fair amount, if you watch me on a Sunday morning, it's horrible. Okay, when I'm in church, my wife says, "Should I bring a coloring book for you?" Because it's so hard for me to sit and listen to somebody else, because I sit there and I say, "Okay, tell the story this way." Well, don't screw up that story. Okay, go here. I get really... And what I do then is that I miss completely what God wants to say to me, because I'm so worried about how am I going to teach it to other people. Okay? So, I need this as much as you. So the humility piece, try memorizing Philippians 2, 1 through 11. Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus, who although he was God, he gave up everything, took on the place of a servant, humbled himself to the point of obedience to death, even death on a cross. Right? So that's something we could do for humility. And ask people around me, am I seeking too much attention? Get them to be honest. Hungry. Consider a coach and ask, are you pushing yourself enough? And smart. Some of us have propensity to say dumb things in meetings. To speak too sharply or to say things that are hurtful to other people and then just to move on. But guess what? Other people in the room leave feeling like crap. Their feelings are hurt. They feel dumb, whatever the case may be. There is a phenomenal Catalyst podcast, episode number 436, by Egerson Emeriches, that says it's called Before You Hit Send. So, how many people have ever sent a dumb email that you wish you hadn't? Okay, and you want it back? Okay. How many people have done that this week? Okay. Okay, don't do it. So a rule of thumb is don't send anything that could have emotion in an email. It's not helpful. But in that little podcast, he walks through, before we say something, or before you send an email, is it necessary? Is it helpful? And then 2 other questions. And it's brilliant. Okay, so if you're one of those people who is tempted to blurt out stuff or to say stuff that's hurtful, listen to that episode. It's really, really helpful. Okay. Any other questions, thoughts about Ideal Team Player? By the way, I think if you ever wanted somebody to come into your chapter and do Ideal Team Player, or just I'm available, Daryl, Dan, I think just about any of the trainers would be willing to come in and do that. And here's the beauty of it. If you wanted to do it on your own, all of the materials that I'm using today come from the tablegroup.com. That's not there. Okay. Come from the tablegroup.com. You can go there and look under books, Ideal Team Player, and you will see they have the little article, a one-page summary. They have the self-assessment. And then they have further tools to use for hiring, that ask good questions of people to see whether or not you want to have them on their team. So there was another leader who used this thing called the 3 C's before. If you want to hire people onto your team, volunteers, whatever the case may be, character, competency, and chemistry. That was pretty helpful. But I find this hungry, humble, and smart really helpful. And how easy is that? Hey, hungry, humble, and smart. So go back to your chapters. Be a good team player. You will earn much credibility, which will allow you to speak into all sorts of situations that you didn't think you could. Okay, simply by being hungry, humble, and smart. There you go. We have a 7-minute break. We will start at 11:05. Is that good, Daryl? Yep. Okay.